The quill has been scratching for 19 hours, and the smell of stale incense and drying ink is now indistinguishable from my own skin. I am a low-level functionary of the administratum, a single living gear in the Leviathan machine that governs the segmentum solar. And I have seen the true weight of the god, Emperor's peace. It is not measured in the heroic blood of Astartes or the fire of Nova cannons, but in the crushing, relentless gravity of the parchment. Control is maintained through the slow strangulation of the soul by a million sub-clauses. The threat of the gallows for a misplaced decimal point, and the terrifying realization that your entire existence is merely a rounding error in a ledger that hasn't been balanced in 3 centuries. Fear is the foundation, faith is the mortar, and the paperwork is the cage that keeps the galaxy from screaming. If you still walk beside me through fire and scripture, then bear witness. Subscribe, share this burden, and let others hear the truth buried beneath hymns. The vibration of the deck plating is a constant, rhythmic bruising of the soles of my feet, a reminder that even here, in the heart of a void, ship's administrative spire, we are merely guests in a metal tomb hurtling through the Imperium. I have spent 42 years within these specific 4 walls, a chamber no larger than a cargo crate, dedicated entirely to the tullying of groks, meat ties from the sub-sectors of the Calix's expanse. People often imagine the machinery of the Imperium as a grand, golden clockwork, but it is actually a grinding, rusted engine fueled by the pulp of human lives and the endless, scratching noise of quills on vellum. To control a billion souls is not a matter of charisma or even of direct violence, though the threat of the latter is the air we breathe. It is a matter of administrative exhaustion. If you give a man a god to fear and a quota to meet, he will not have the energy to wonder if there is a better way to live. He will simply keep walking until his heart stops, terrified that if he halts for even a second, the great ledger will mark him as a deficit to be liquidated. I remember a man from the lower decks, a rating whose only job was to lubricate the primary cog, wheels of the oxygen scrubbers. He had missed a single shift because his lungs had finally succumbed to the iron, dust that permeates the ship's atmosphere. He did not ask for mercy. He did not plead for his life. He simply stood before the Magost clerk and apologized for the inefficiency of his dying. That is the triumph of our system. We have not just conquered the stars, we have conquered the human instinct for self-preservation, replacing it with a pathological devotion to the process. The process is everything. It is the holy manifestation of the Emperor's will on a plane of existence that is otherwise chaotic and meaningless. Without the paperwork, the stars would go out. Without the census, the tithe would fail. Without the tithe, the armies of the throne would starve. Therefore, the ink is as vital as the blood. The air in the scriptum, Tertius, is thick with the smell of ozone and the oily musk of the heavy machinery that processes the data slugs. It is a sensory assault that never relents, a soup of chemical preservatives and the dry, choking dust of ancient records that have not been touched since the age of the Great Crusade. You can taste the history here, and it tastes like copper and mold. Every morning, before the first candle is lit, we recite the litany of the correct entry, a prayer that asks the Omnissiah to keep our hands steady and our eyes sharp. A single digit transposed in a population report can result in a planet being over-taxed to the point of total societal collapse, or worse, under-taxed to the point where the Departamento Munitorum lacks the shells to defend a neighboring system from the greenskin tide. We are the silent executioners. We kill with the stroke of a pen, and we do it with the cold, detached certainty of a machine. There is a specific kind of horror in seeing a world's doom written in a neat, cursive hand on a piece of parchment that will eventually be filed in a vault and forgotten. I have seen orders for the orbital bombardment of hive worlds signed with less emotion than a grocery list. It is necessary. The scale of the Imperium is too vast for empathy. If we felt the weight of every life we traded for time or resources, we would go mad within a week. Instead, we look at the numbers. We look at the graphs. We look at the holy seals of the High Lords, and we obey. The machinery of the state is designed to insulate us from the consequences of our actions, turning the act of governing into a series of disconnected, mechanical tasks. Fear is the primary tool of this governance, but it is not a loud or sudden fear. It is the quiet, creeping dread of the shadow. It is the knowledge that someone, somewhere, is watching your output. On the world of scintilla, in the great hive cities that pierce the clouds, the citizens live under the constant surveillance of servo, skulls, and hidden vox thieves. Every word is recorded, every gesture analyzed for signs of deviancy. But it is not the inquisition they fear most in their daily lives. It is the loss of their ration cards. It is the bureaucratic erasure of their identity. To the Imperium, a man who does not produce is a man who does not exist. We maintain control by making the state the sole provider of survival. You eat because the administratum allows you a portion of the tithe. You breathe because the tech priests maintain the vents. You pray because the ecclesiarchy tells you that your suffering is the only currency the emperor accepts. By monopolizing the means of existence, we ensure that rebellion is not just a crime, but a death sentence by starvation. I once processed a file for a localized uprising on a mining moon. The miners had stopped working because the heat in the shafts had become unbearable, reaching temperatures that melted the skin off their bones. The solution was not to fix the cooling units. The solution was to stop the shipment of water. Within 3 days, the survivors were back in the shafts, praying for the privilege of working in the fire. They realized that the emperor's displeasure was far colder than any furnace. The paperwork itself is a labyrinth that few ever escape. We use archaic systems of filing that date back millennia, languages that have drifted so far from their origins that they are essentially codes known only to the higher depths. This is intentional. Knowledge is power, and by making the laws of the Imperium incomprehensible to the average citizen, we ensure their total dependence on the clerical caste. You cannot argue against a law you cannot read. You cannot protest a tax you do not understand. The complexity is the armor of the state. It creates a sense of overwhelming inevitability. When a citizen is told that their ancestral home is being demolished to make way for a new Prometheum refinery, they are presented with 10,000 pages of documentation, all stamped with the terrifying authority of the Golden Throne. They do not fight. They simply bow their heads. The sheer volume of the evidence against their right to exist is enough to break their spirit. In the scriptum, we spend years learning the nuances of the redundant verification protocols, a series of checks and balances that serve no purpose other than to slow the flow of information and ensure that by the time a grievance reaches a high official, the person who filed it has likely been dead for decades. Time is a weapon we use against our own people. We outlast their anger. We bury their hope under a mountain of forms. Faith is the second pillar of our control, the beautiful, terrible lie that makes the suffering bearable. We do not just tell the people to obey. We tell them that their obedience is a form of worship. The ecclesiarchy works hand in hand with the administratum to ensure that the work quota is seen as a divine mandate. The factories are cathedrals. The assembly lines are altars, and the foreman is a priest of the gear and the grease. When a worker's back breaks under the weight of a heavy crate, the priest does not offer medicine, he offers the blessing of the martyr. He tells the dying man that his pain is a gift, a way to share in the emperor's eternal agony on the throne. It is a masterstroke of psychological engineering. By sanctifying toil, we have turned the very mechanism of oppression into a source of spiritual pride. The people do not want to be free, they want to be holy. And in the Imperium, holiness is measured in hours worked and tithers paid. I have seen mothers weep with joy because their sons were taken by the black ships, convinced that their child's psychic essence, being consumed by the emperor, is the highest honor a family can achieve. They do not see the horror of it. They only see the golden light we have projected onto the dark reality of our survival. We control the narrative of the soul, and in doing so, we control the movements of the body. But even with faith and fear, the paperwork remains the ultimate arbiter. It is the physical manifestation of the Emperor's will. Every morning, I see the massive elevators bringing up the daily harvest of scrolls from the lower levels. They are damp with the sweat of the couriers, stained with the grease of the hive, and occasionally spotted with blood. Each one is a life, a death, a contract, a birth. We process them with a speed that borders on the miraculous. Yet the pile never shrinks. It is a tide that will eventually drown us all. I often wonder if the Emperor, in his silent vigil on terror, knows about the ink-stained men like me. Does he know that his empire is held together by the thin threads of bureaucratic habit? Does he care that we have turned his dream of a rational, enlightened humanity into a nightmare of ledgers and lashings? Probably not. A god does not concern himself with the dust in the corners of his temple. My hands are permanently stained a deep, bruised purple from the ink we use for high-priority attrition reports. It doesn't wash off. It has seeped into my pores, into my marrow. I am becoming the parchment I serve. The efficiency of our control is often undermined by its own scale. There are sectors of this ship that have been lost to the darkness for generations. Decks where the light globes failed centuries ago, and the inhabitants have devolved into blind, pale scavengers. Yet, the administratum still sends food shipments to those decks because the automated schedules were never updated. Somewhere in a vault on Terra, a clerk believes those decks are still populated by loyal factory workers, and so the resources are wasted, falling into the dark to be fought over by monsters. This is the paradox of the Imperium. We are a civilization of absolute order that is constantly being undone by its own inertia. We are too big to change, and too rigid to adapt. So we double down on the paperwork. We create new departments to oversee the old ones. We appoint overseers to watch the watchers. The bureaucracy grows like a cancer, consuming everything in its path, until the act of governing becomes more important than the people being governed. We are no longer serving humanity. We are serving the machine that was built to protect it. I remember a specific case, File 992G. It was a request from a small agricultural world for additional grain, seed. The world was experiencing a famine due to a blight. The request was filed in the standard manner. It took 3 years to reach my desk. By the time I approved the shipment and sent it to the Departamento Munitorum for fulfillment, the world had already been declared exterminatus by an inquisitor who found the starving population to be susceptible to the whispers of the warp. The ships carrying the seed arrived at a dead, blackened husk of a planet. They unloaded the grain into the ash because the manifest said they had to. The paperwork was satisfied. The grain rotted on a dead world while other planets starved. No one was punished for this. The system worked perfectly. The orders were followed. The boxes were checked. That is how we control billions. Not by making sure they are happy, or even that they survive, but by making sure the record reflects that we tried. The record is the only truth that matters. The reality of the suffering is secondary to the accuracy of the report. As the vox hum in my ear grows louder, signaling the end of my current shift, I look at the stack of data, slates waiting for me tomorrow. They represent the lives of people I will never meet, on worlds I will never see. I will decide their taxes, their rations, and their fates with a flick of my wrist. I will do it because it is my duty. I will do it because I am afraid of what would happen if I didn't. I will do it because I believe, in some small, dark corner of my heart, that this is what the Emperor wants. He needs us to be cold. He needs us to be relentless. He needs the paperwork to be perfect, even if the galaxy is burning. The ink is drying on my latest entry. Another world has been taxed into penury. Another fleet has been redirected to a war it cannot win. I feel nothing but the ache in my joints and the salt in my eyes. The machine turns. the quill scratches. The Imperium survives another day. Not through courage, but through the sheer, stubborn refusal of the bureaucracy to admit that it is failing. We are the masters of the ledger, and the ledger is the master of us all. The transition from the light of the scriptorium to the deep iron guts of the hive is not merely a change in geography. It is a descent into a different kind of theology, one where the deity is the furnace and the scripture is written in the language of heat and pressure. To understand how we control the billions, you must understand the architecture of their despair. We do not build cities for comfort. We build them as containers for the maximum extraction of human labor, on the forge world of Metallica, or even in the sprawling industrial wastes of Armageddon. The physical environment is designed to remind the inhabitant of their total insignificance at every waking second. The ceilings are too high to see, lost in a permanent cloud of toxic smog and recycled steam, while the walkways are too narrow to allow for anything but a single, file march to the factorum gates. There is no horizon in a hive city. There is only the next level up, or the long, terrifying drop into the sump below. This lack of a horizon is a psychological cage. When a man cannot see the sky, he forgets that there is a universe beyond his immediate struggle. His world shrinks to the size of his workstation and the length of his ration queue. We have found that, by removing the visual possibility of escape, the mental desire for it eventually atrophies. I was once sent to oversee a structural audit on the world of Orestes, specifically within the lower, mid-spires where the manufacturing of heavy-grade promethium filters takes place. The air there was not air. It was a suspension of metallic filings and vaporized lubricants that coated the back of the throat like a second skin. The sound was a physical weight, a rhythmic, subterranean thrumming of massive pistons that synchronized the heartbeats of everyone within 5 miles. This is the industrial cadence. By subjecting the population to a constant, low-frequency vibration, we induce a state of mild, chronic agitation that makes the populace easier to lead. They are always on edge, always tired, always slightly vibrating with the rhythm of the machines they serve. In this state, the mind does not engage in complex sedition. It focuses on the basic, animal requirements of the next hour. We have refined this to a science. The lighting in these sectors is never truly bright, nor is it ever truly dark. It is a perpetual, sickly amber twilight that disrupts the natural circadian rhythms of the human body. Without a clear day or night, the concept of a workday becomes meaningless. There is only the shift and the recovery from the shift. Control is also maintained through the deliberate engineering of scarcity. The Imperium is the wealthiest entity in the history of the species, yet its citizens live in a state of permanent lack. This is not an accident of logistics. It is a strategy of governance. A man with a full belly and a warm home begins to think he has rights. A man who must fight for a clean cup of water or a single nutrient views the state not as an oppressor, but as a savior. We distribute life in increments. The water reclamation plants are guarded by the Adeptus Arbits with more fervor than the planetary governor's palace. To turn off a valve is to kill a district, and the people know this. They see the armored pipes and the heavy locks, and they understand that their very survival is a privilege granted by the throne. This creates a culture of extreme lateral suspicion. If your neighbor is seen taking an extra ration, or if they appear to be breathing more easily while you are choking, you do not join them in protest, you report them. You report them in the hope that their stolen portion will be returned to the collective pool, or perhaps, as a reward for your loyalty, given to you. We have turned the instinct for communal survival into a competitive race for the emperor's crumbs. The architecture itself is a sermon in stone and iron. Every archway is adorned with the skulls of those who failed in their duty. Every pillar is inscribed with warnings against the sin of sloth. You cannot look anywhere in a hive without being reminded that you are being watched, and that your value is strictly utilitarian. The scale is intentionally crushing. When a worker stands at the foot of a great statuary of a saint, they are not meant to feel inspired. They are meant to feel microscopic. They are meant to understand that the Imperium is eternal and they are fleeting. This sense of transience is vital. We want the citizens to feel like ghosts in a machine that has existed for 10,000 years and will exist for 10,000 more. If your life is but a flicker in the shadows of the cathedral mills, why would you risk the stability of the entire structure for a momentary grievance? The crushing weight of history is our most effective sedative. We teach that change is not progress, change is heresy. Stability is the only virtue, even if that stability is a state of constant, grinding misery in the mid-levels of hive primus. I observed a group of lamps men whose entire ancestral lineage had been dedicated to the maintenance of a single-mile-long stretch of lumen strips. They lived in the crawl spaces behind the walls, breathing the hot, dry air of the conduits. They had developed their own dialect of Low Gothic, a series of clicks and whistles that mimicked the sparking of the wires. They did not know the name of the governor. They did not know the name of the planet. They only knew the litany of the filament. This is the ultimate goal of our compartmentalization. By breaking the population into millions of tiny, specialized subgroups, we prevent the formation of a unified class consciousness. The lamps men do not care about the plight of the filter miners. The filter miners despise the cog tenders. Everyone is trapped in their own narrow silo of expertise and tradition. They are like cells in a body that do not realize they belong to the same organism. If one cell becomes cancerous, if a district rebels, it is easy to isolate and cauterize because it has no connection to the surrounding tissue. We rule through a fragmented reality. The paperwork I processed today dealt with atmospheric reclamation penalties. Essentially, it was a list of districts that had failed to meet their oxygen recycling quotas. The punishment was a reduction in the purity of the air pumped into those levels for the next lunar cycle. As I stamped the order, I could almost feel the thickening of the air in my own lungs. I am not exempt from the machine. I am simply in a slightly more comfortable gear. The fear we instill is not just for the subjects, it is for the administrators too. If I fail to stamp these penalties, I am guilty of obstructing the Emperor's justice. The fear travels upward, a ladder of terror that reaches all the way to the High Lords. No one is truly in charge. We are all just reacting to the pressures from above and below. The paperwork is the only thing that doesn't feel fear. It is the only thing that remains consistent while people burn and worlds choke. Faith is the glue that prevents the machine from shaking itself to pieces. It is the spiritual justification for the physical nightmare. We tell the people that their suffering is a refinement, a purging of the soul's impurities. The heat of the forge is compared to the fire of the Emperor's will. The exhaustion of the body is presented as a holy emptiness that can only be filled by the light of terror. This is why the ecclesiarchy is so vital to the administratum. We provide the quotas, they provide the reasons. They turn the atmospheric reclamation penalty into a trial of the suffocated saint. They turn the hunger of the famine into a fast of the martyr's grace. By rebranding agony as a religious experience, we take the sting out of rebellion. How can you rebel against a God who suffered more than you? The image of the Emperor on the golden throne, a rotting corpse held in eternal agony for the sake of mankind, is the ultimate psychological checkmate. If the master of mankind can endure 10,000 years of psychic torment, you can certainly endure a 12-hour shift in the vats. I once saw a group of pilgrims who had traveled from the sectors of the Ocularis Terribus. They were broken, mutated by the proximity to the Great Rift, their skin gray and peeling. They had come to the administratum hub to petition for a new shrine to be built in their ruins. They didn't ask for medicine. They didn't ask for food. They asked for a place to kneel. It was one of the few times I felt a genuine chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. We have succeeded so well in our indoctrination that the people have come to love their chains. They view the very instruments of their control as sacred relics. The ledger I write in is not seen by the commoner as a record of their exploitation, but as a holy book in which their names are inscribed in the emperor's sight. To be ignored by the bureaucracy is a fate worse than death. It is to be outside the emperor's light. We have made the paperwork a form of grace. The sensory reality of this control is a symphony of decay. It is the sound of the vox casters in the streets, blaring a loop of hymns and execution notices. It is the smell of the corpse, starch being boiled in the communal vats, a flat, yeasty odor that lingers in every hallway. It is the feel of the cold, damp stone of the hab blocks, where the walls are always weeping with condensation. We use these sensations to wear down the spirit, a man who is always cold, always slightly hungry, and always surrounded by the noise of the state cannot think clearly. His brain is focused on the immediate physical discomfort, leaving no room for the abstract concepts of liberty or justice. We manage the billion by managing their senses. We give them just enough light to see their work, just enough heat to stay alive, and just enough sound to drown out their own thoughts. As I look at the next data slate, I see a report on the sanctified culling of the unproductive. It is a cold title for a horrific reality. The rounding up of the elderly and the infirm who can no longer contribute to the hive's output. They are processed into the very nutrient, paste that feeds the younger workers. It is the perfect cycle of efficiency. Nothing is wasted. Even in death, the citizen serves the state. I sign the authorization. My hand does not shake. Why should it? In the logic of the Imperium, this is an act of mercy. We are sparing them the slow death of starvation and giving their lives a final, useful purpose. The paperwork is neat. The numbers balance. The hive continues to breathe, fueled by the pulverized bones of its children. This is the heart of our control. We have made the unthinkable logical. We have made the monstrous necessary. And as long as the ink holds out, the machine will never stop. The taste of metal is a permanent fixture of my palate. The result of a life spent breathing the exhaled breath of a billion other souls recycled through the corroded filters of a hive's lung stacks. It is a dry, biting flavor, like licking a rusted blade, and it serves as a constant reminder that in the Imperium, even the air is a rationed commodity. To understand how we maintain order, one must look at the mechanics of the titration. We do not merely provide for the masses, we meter their existence with a precision that would make a magos of the Logis weep with envy. In the lower reaches of hive Tarsus, the oxygen mix is kept at exactly 19%. It is just enough to keep a worker conscious and productive, but insufficient to allow for the kind of vigorous physical exertion required for a riot. We have found that a slightly hypoxic population is a docile population. They move slower, they think in shorter loops, and they lack the lung capacity to shout down a speaker on a podium. This is the physiological foundation of our control. We have turned the very act of breathing into a subtle, biological leash. I spent 6 months assigned to the distribution oversight of the corpse, starch vats in the industrial spire of Geryon. The facility was a cathedral of grey, unyielding stone where the air was thick with the cloying, sweet rot smell of the rendering process. Here, the final accounting of a human life is performed. When a citizen dies, they do not go to the earth, they go to the vats. Their protein is reclaimed. Their minerals are harvested, and their essence is pressed into the drab, tasteless blocks that feed their grandchildren. It is the ultimate expression of the emperor's frugality. But the control lies in the distribution. We do not hand out the starch freely. It is dispensed through automated kiosks that require a valid labor, chit, a thumbprint, and a genetic scan. If a hab block falls behind on its production quota, the kiosks simply do not activate. The starvation is not a punishment handed down by a judge. It is a mechanical consequence of a failed ledger. This removal of human agency from the act of oppression is what makes it so unbreakable. The starving worker does not hate the administratum official they will never see. They hate the silent, unyielding machine that refuses to recognize their hunger because their output was 3% below the target. Fear in the Imperium is not a spike of adrenaline, it is a grinding, chronic erosion of the spirit. It is the fear of the discrepancy. In the archives, we have a saying, "The Emperor knows all, but the administratum records all." Every citizen carries a data slug, a heavy piece of iron and silicon that records every transaction, every labor shift, every medical intervention, and every religious observance. To lose your slug is to become a non-person. In the eyes of the law, a non-person does not exist. They cannot buy food, they cannot enter a hab block, and they cannot be buried in sanctified ground. I have seen men kill each other over a misplaced data slug, not because they wanted the other's identity, but because the fear of being unrecorded is more potent than the fear of the grave. We control the billions by making their identity a fragile, temporary gift from the state. By holding the power to erase a man with a single keystroke, we ensure that he will police himself. He will not speak out, he will not steal, and he will not dream, because the record must remain spotless. The record is his only shield against the void. The sensory environment of the distribution hubs is designed to reinforce this dependency. The lighting is a harsh, flickering blue that leaches the color from human skin, making everyone look like the corpses they are destined to become. The sound is a constant, looping broadcast of tithe, success stories, tales of worlds that exceeded their quotas and were rewarded with a 10-minute increase in their lighting cycles. We create a reality where the only possible joy is found in the approval of the machine. I remember a woman who stood at my desk for 4 days, refusing to leave because her labor chit had been flagged for sub-standard devotion. She didn't argue that she was devoted. She argued that she could be more devoted if only the machine would give her the chance. She was weeping, not for her life, but for her utility. We have colonized the very concept of self-worth. In the Imperium, you are only as valuable as the gap between what you consume and what you produce. If that gap closes, you are a deficit, and the Imperium does not tolerate deficits. In my current role, I oversee the ecclesiastical paperwork for labor saints. This is a fascinating intersection of the ledger and the liturgy. When a factory worker dies in a particularly grisly accident, crushed by a press or melted in a vat, we do not simply file a death certificate. We coordinate with the local ministorum to declare the site of the death a minor reliquary of toil. We put up a brass plaque, we burn some low-grade incense, and we tell the remaining workers that their fallen comrade has achieved a state of grace through his industrial sacrifice. This transforms a workplace hazard into a spiritual aspiration. Instead of demanding better safety protocols, the workers pray to the spot where their friend was pulverized, hoping for the same honor. It is a masterpiece of social manipulation. We take the blood that should be on our hands, and we paint it onto the icons of the faith, turning our negligence into their salvation. The paperwork for this is immense. I must balance the cost of the brass plaque against the projected increase in productivity from the spired workforce. Usually, the investment pays for itself within 3 shifts. The scale of this control is often difficult to visualize, even for those of us who live within it. Imagine a hive spire as a single, vertical organ of a vast, interstellar beast. There are trillions of these organs, all pumping resources toward the heart of the Imperium. To keep this beast alive, we must ensure that no single cell thinks it is more important than the whole. We achieve this through the bureaucracy of the mundane. We force the citizens to spend half of their waking hours in lines. Lines for water, lines for prayer, lines for labor assignment, lines for the renewal of their breathing permits. A man in a line is a man who is not causing trouble. He is occupied. He is focused on the back of the head of the person in front of him. His world is reduced to the slow, shuffling progress toward a window where a bored clerk will stamp his papers and tell him to return in 6 months. This exhaustion of time is a deliberate tactic. By stealing the hours of their lives through useless, repetitive tasks, we leave them no time to organize, to educate themselves, or to imagine a galaxy where they are not cattle. The sound of the hive is the sound of the state's dominance. It is the vox imperator, the gargantuan speakers mounted on every corner that scream the hours, the prayers, and the warnings. There is no silence in the Imperium. Silence is dangerous. Silence allows for thought. Therefore, we fill the air with a cacophony of white noise, industrial clatter, and religious chanting. It is a sonic wall that hem in the mind. Even in sleep, the citizens are subjected to sub-oral indoctrination, low-frequency hums that reinforce the tenets of the imperial creed. You do not just learn to obey, you are conditioned to find comfort in the sound of authority. I find that when the power occasionally flickers in my office and the vox hum dies, I feel a sudden, sharp anxiety. The silence feels like a void that is about to swallow me. I have become so accustomed to the noise of my own subjugation that I am terrified of the alternative. That is the true success of our control. The prisoner has become the jailer of his own mind. I recall a report from the world of Vostroya, where a clerical error had led to the shipment of cold, weather gear to a desert world and cooling units to an ice moon. The result was the death of several thousand people on both planets. My task was not to fix the error, it was too late for that, but to ensure that the chain of custody for the paperwork was intact. As long as the signatures were valid and the seals were unbroken, the deaths were legally optimal. In the Imperium, a death that is documented correctly is not a tragedy, it is a statistic. We have created a moral vacuum where the only sin is a procedural one. This allows the billions of administrators like myself to function without the interference of a conscience. We are not killing people. We are processing files. The paperwork acts as a filter, stripping away the humanity of the victims until all that remains are the numbers. And numbers do not bleed. Numbers do not scream. Numbers do not look at you with eyes full of betrayal. Faith, however, is what prevents this numerical coldness from becoming a source of rebellion. The people need to believe that their misery has a cosmic purpose. We provide that purpose through the cult of the tithe. We teach that every bolt tightened and every scroll written is a literal blow struck against the archenemy. We turn the boredom of the desk and the exhaustion of the line into a holy war. A worker isn't just making a screw, they are forging a weapon for the emperor. This infusion of meaning into the meaningless is the most potent drug we possess. It creates a population that is not only willing to suffer, but is actively seeking out more suffering as a proof of their loyalty. I have seen scribes work until their eyes bled, and their fingers locked into permanent claws, refusing to stop because they believed that their speed was holding back the darkness of the warp. They are right, of any fashion, but not in the way they think. Their speed keeps the machine running, and the machine is the only thing that keeps us from the abyss. But the machine is also the thing that is consuming us. The physical toll of this work is reflected in the very architecture of our bodies. In the administratum, we are recognizable by our scribe stoop, our ink-stained skin, and the bionic augmentations that replace our failing eyes and hands. We are being slowly integrated into the filing systems we serve. My own left eye was replaced 10 years ago with a magnifying lens that allows me to read the micro-script of the high-teeth ledgers. It hums constantly, a tiny insect-like vibration in my skull. I no longer see the world in colors or shapes, I see it in columns and rows. I see the billions of the Imperium not as people, but as a vast, shifting sea of data that must be combed and categorized. We control them because we have ceased to see them as anything other than resources to be managed. To the eye of the state, a human being is just a temporary storage vessel for labor and faith, to be emptied and discarded when the vessel cracks. Tonight, the incense in the scriptorium is particularly pungent, a mix of myrrh and heavy industrial ozone. It makes my head swim. I am looking at a series of requisition forms for a new correctional colony on a moon in the Ultima Segmentum. The moon has no atmosphere, so the prisoners will be required to wear pressurized suits that are welded shut. They will work in the mines until the suits fail or the air runs out. It is a death sentence, but on the form, it is listed as productive rehabilitation. I check the boxes. I apply the seal. I am not a monster. I am a clerk. I am doing my part to ensure the survival of our species. If these prisoners do not die in the mines, the Forge worlds will lack the ore to build the ships that protect us. The logic is circular, perfect, and utterly heartless. We control the billions by convincing ourselves that there is no other way. We have built a cage so large that no one can see the bars, and we have called it survival. As the quill scratches across the final page of the night, I realize that the ink is not just on my hands, that is in my soul. The taste of ozone on my tongue is sharper tonight. A chemical warning that the ship's life sustainers are laboring under the strain of a 3% increase in the spire's population. In the Imperium, even the weight of a body is a logistical burden that must be accounted for in the grand ledger of the void. To govern billions is to accept that the individual is a ghost, a flickering candle in a hurricane of statistics. We do not maintain control through the presence of the god, Emperor's light alone. We maintain it through the terrifying, absolute anonymity of the subject. When a man is reduced to a serial number etched into a bone, chip beneath his skin, he loses the capacity for the kind of pride that fuels rebellion. He becomes a unit of energy, a data point in a flow chart of attrition. In the sub-vaults of the administratum, we treat names as inconveniences. A name carries history, family, and grievance. A number is clean. A number can be subtracted without the mess of sentiment. I remember a specific directive that crossed my desk during the solar reclamation cycle on the world of Valerius. The planetary governor had requested a temporary reprieve from the labor tithe due to a widespread outbreak of lung rot in the lower hives. The paperwork was immaculate, the pleas were heart-wrenching, and the medical data was irrefutable. But the machine of the Imperium does not recognize biology, it only recognizes the contract. I was tasked with drafting the refusal. I did not do it out of cruelty, but out of the cold mathematical necessity that the factories of Valerius must produce the heavy bolter casings required for the Cadian gates. To grant mercy to one world is to condemn a regiment of the Imperial Guard to death by lack of ammunition. This is the ultimate trap of our control. We have created a system where empathy is a logistical failure. By making every citizen's life a direct trade, off for another's survival, we ensure that the administrators remain as cold as the vacuum of space. We do not see ourselves as tyrants, but as the grim accountants of a species on the brink of extinction. The architecture of our control is most visible in the chambers of adjudication, where the adeptus arbits administer the lex imperialis. These are not courtrooms in the sense that an ancient man might understand. They are processing centers for the removal of the defective. The air in these halls is heavy with the scent of scorched flesh and the cold, sterile smell of promethium-based cleaners. There is no defense, only the reading of the violation and the immediate delivery of the sentence. We use public punishment not as a deterrent, but as a form of civic theater. The gallows walks. That line, the main thoroughfares of the hive, are perpetually occupied. To see a neighbor hanged for the crime of logistical sloth is a more powerful sermon than any priest could ever deliver. It reinforces the central truth of our society: your life is a loan from the Emperor, and the interest is paid in total, unquestioning obedience. If you default on that interest, the debt is collected in blood. Fear is the fuel, but the bureaucracy of silence is the engine in the Imperium. Information is the most heavily rationed resource. The average citizen does not know that there are other worlds, or if they do, they believe them to be mythical paradises or hellscapes of pure fire. By keeping the population in a state of profound geographical and historical ignorance. We prevent them from imagining an alternative to their misery. They are told that the hive is the universe. They are told that the emperor is the only thing standing between them and the literal devouring of their souls. This is a truth, of course. But it is a truth we use as a cage. We manage the billions by ensuring they have no frame of reference for their own suffering. A man who has never seen a tree does not mourn the loss of the forest. He only worries about the quality of the recycled air in his hab block. We have flattened the human imagination until it fits within the narrow confines of a work order. I spent a decade in the sector of lost petitions, a graveyard of parchment where the grievances of entire planetary populations go to die. These are the vaults where the cries for help are filed away under pending classification. The silence in those vaults is absolute, broken only by the scurrying of cyber, rats and the occasional wheeze of a dying servitor. It was there that I realized the true genius of our paperwork. We do not ignore the people, we bury them in a process that never ends. Every petition requires a counter-petition. Every complaint must be witnessed by 3 officials who no longer exist. Every request for aid must be balanced against a 300-year-old tithe debt. We control the billions by giving them the illusion of a voice, while ensuring that the voice is lost in a labyrinth of our own making. They die waiting for an answer. And their children take their place in the queue, believing that the answer is coming. The hope of the bureaucracy is more effective than the despair of the lash. The sensory reality of the administratum is one of constant, low-level physical degradation. My skin is the color of the parchment I process, a pale, yellowish hue that never sees the sun. My eyes are permanently bloodshot from the strain of reading by the guttering light of tallow candles. The sound of my world is the rhythmic, metallic clack-thump of the pneumatic tubes that deliver the daily harvest of data slugs. We are the monks of the machine, living lives of ascetic devotion to the ledger. We control the billions because we have first controlled ourselves. We have excised the weakness of personal desire and replaced it with the strength of the objective. When I sign a death warrant for 1 billion souls, my heart does not quicken. I am merely the conduit for the Emperor's will, a biological extension of the great plan. This detachment is our greatest weapon. You cannot bribe a man who has no self, and you cannot revolt against a machine that does not feel. Faith is the lubricant that allows the gears of this machine to turn without catching fire. In the ecclesiarchy, they speak of the blessedness of the unknowing. They teach that to ask, why, is the first step toward the abyss. We reinforce this through the litanies of the routine. Every action in a citizen's day is tied to a religious observance. You do not just wake up, you perform the rite of the first breath. You do not just work, you perform the sacrament of the gear. By sanctifying the mundane, we remove the possibility of boredom, and boredom is the father of dissent. A man who believes that his repetitive, soul-crushing job is a holy duty is a man who will never put down his tools. We have turned the entire Imperium into a giant, living monastery where the prayer is production and the god is the state. I see the results in the reports. The worlds with the highest levels of religious fervor always have the lowest levels of administrative friction. The more they pray, the less they protest. I recall a report from the Segmentum Obscurus concerning a hive world that had run out of food. Instead of rebelling, the population had gathered in the squares to sing hymns until they collapsed from hunger. They died with the emperor's name on their parched lips, their bodies stacked neatly for the rendering vats. The local governor was commended for his exemplary spiritual management. This is the pinnacle of our control, a population that views its own destruction as a final act of worship. The paperwork for this event was minimal. A few seals of commendation, a ledger entry to mark the world as inactive, and a requisition for new settlers once the atmosphere had cleared of the stench of death. The machine does not stop, it merely resets. We manage the billions by making sure they are more afraid of disappointing the emperor than they are of dying. The physical toll on the populace is a deliberate part of the design. A healthy, energetic body is a dangerous thing. We prefer the industrial physique, short, thick-boned, and perpetually exhausted. The rations are designed to provide caloric energy without the luxury of vitamins that promote mental clarity. We want them strong enough to lift the crates, but too tired to wonder if they should. The stagnation of the flesh mirrors the stagnation of the mind. In my office, I have a chart that correlates calorie reduction with a decrease in incidents of public disorder. There is a sweet spot, a point of perfect equilibrium, where the population is too hungry to fight, but not hungry enough to die too quickly. Finding and maintaining that point is the true art of the administratum. We are the shepherds of the starving, ensuring that the flock never finds the strength to leap the fence. The sound of the vox, thieves in the walls, is a constant, scratching reminder that even the administrators are under the gaze of the Inquisition. Control is a circle, it has no end. I watch my subordinates. They watch me, and the servo skulls watch us all. This atmosphere of total, mutual suspicion ensures that the paperwork remains honest. One false entry, one act of unsanctioned mercy, and the red, laced file is opened. The fear of being the subject of the paperwork, rather than the author of it, is what keeps us at our desks until our hearts fail. We are the slaves who guard the slaves. I look at my ink-stained fingers and I see the bars of my own cage. I am the architect of 1 billion deaths, yet I cannot even choose the color of the ink I use. The system is total. It is absolute. It is the only thing left in a universe that wants us dead. As the night deepens and the ship's vibrations shift into the rest cycle, I prepare the final reports for the morning's transport. They are heavy, iron-bound books that contain the fates of systems I will never visit. I feel a strange, cold pride as I apply the final seal. The Imperium is a nightmare, a charnel house, a grinding mill of human potential. But it is a nightmare that functions. It is a charnel house that endures. And as long as the paperwork is filed, the God Emperor stays on his throne, and the human race continues its slow, agonizing crawl through the stars. We control the billions because if we did not, there would be nothing left but the screaming of the warp. The ledger is our only light in the dark. The taste of ash has become my primary sustenance, a fine, grey powder that settles upon the tongue and reminds us that every monument we build is but a future ruin. To understand the final mechanism of our control, you must understand the theology of the end. We do not merely govern the billions for the sake of their survival in the present. We govern them as a preparation for a holy extinction. In the high spires of the administratum, we often speak of the final account, the moment when the last drop of human blood is balanced against the survival of the species. This is the dark apex of our paperwork, the planning for a galaxy that no longer contains us. We control the populace by making them participants in their own apocalypse. They are taught that every sacrifice, every lash of the overseer's whip, and every hunger pang is a contribution to a war that cannot be won, but must never be lost. We have turned the entirety of human existence into a grand, defensive siege where the only victory is the postponement of the inevitable. I spent the last 3 years of my tenure within the chamber of exterminatus authorization, a place of such profound silence that you can hear the flickering of the candle flames. It is here that the paperwork reaches its ultimate, terrible purity. We do not use ink in this chamber. We use a specialized synthetic fluid that mimics the chemical signature of human blood, a symbolic reminder of the weight of the seals we apply. When an inquisitorial decree arrives, calling for the purging of a world, it is my hand that ensures the logistics of the death are sound. We calculate the most efficient method of erasure cyclonic torpedoes, atmospheric incineration, or the slow, viral dissolution of the biosphere. We manage the billions by holding the power to turn them into memory in a single afternoon. This is the ultimate expression of the Emperor's ownership, A master who can destroy his own house is a master who is truly feared. Yet, the people do not scream against this power. They pray for it to be used elsewhere, creating a culture of desperate, competitive loyalty. The sensory environment of these high-level vaults is one of artificial sterility. The air is filtered so thoroughly that it lacks any scent of life, smelling only of cold iron and the ancient, dry musk of the holy oils used to maintain the data engines. We are separated from the hives by miles of lead, shielding and armored plate, yet the vibration of the masses below still reaches us as a faint, sub-audible moan. It is the sound of the machine's friction. To control the billions, we must remain insulated from the sound of their individual voices. If I were to hear the scream of a single child on a world I am marking for incineration, the ledger would falter. Therefore, we cultivate a state of sanctified deafness. We look at the world through the lens of the macro, Tali. A planet is not a home, it is a strategic asset. A population is not a group of people, it is a biological resource pool. By altering the language of the paperwork, we have altered the capacity of the human heart to feel remorse. We are the architects of a cold universe, and we find comfort in the chill. I remember a report from the world of Corin, a paradise moon that had been accidentally omitted from the tithe schedules for 2 centuries. When the error was discovered, the population had devolved into a state of unsanctioned happiness. They had forgotten the emperor's agony. They had forgotten the necessity of the lash. The solution was not to reintegrate them slowly, but to impose 200 years of back tithers in a single generation. We stripped the world of its soil, its water, and its youth. Within 10 years, the paradise was a graveyard of industrial sludge. I was the one who signed the Restoration of Order manifest. As I watched the data streams of the world's decline, I felt a flicker of what could only be described as professional satisfaction. The ledger was balanced. The anomaly had been corrected. The control of the billions depends on the intolerance of the exception. If one world is allowed to be happy, the entire structure of our misery begins to crumble. We maintain order by ensuring that the suffering is universal. Faith in this final stage of control becomes a weapon of absolute nihilism. The ecclesiarchy teaches the sanctity of the grave, the idea that the only true rest is found in service after death. We use this to justify the servitor programs, where the bodies of the willfully unproductive are lobotomized and turned into mindless, mechanical slaves. I see them every day in the scriptorium, half men, half machines, their flesh stitched with rusted cables, tirelessly hauling the heavy ledgers of the state. They are the perfect citizens. They do not eat, they do not sleep, and they do not question. They are the logical conclusion of our bureaucracy. We control the billions by showing them their future. A state of existence where the soul is removed, and only the function remains. The sight of a servitor is a more effective social stabilizer than a legion of enforcers. It is the ultimate no to the question of human agency. The paperwork itself has become a sentient thing, a recursive loop of self-justification that no longer requires human input to grow. We have logical engines in the lower decks that generate millions of pages of regulations every hour. Regulations that we then spend our lives trying to interpret. We have become the servants of the script. I often find myself writing notes in the margins of reports that I know will never be read, simply because the process demands that the margin be filled. This is the horror of the infinite task. By giving the population and the administration a task that can never be completed, we ensure that they never have the leisure to look up at the stars and wonder why they are here. The paperwork is the gravity that keeps us pinned to the floor of the cage. It is the heavy, suffocating blanket that smothers the sparks of reason. The sound of the end is the sound of the bell of lost souls, on terror, which we hear echoed through the vox relays every time a great tragedy occurs. It is a deep, mournful tolling that vibrates in the marrow of your bones. When the bell rings, the entire spire falls silent. For a few seconds, The quills stop scratching and the engines idle. In that silence, there is a moment of pure, unadulterated terror. We realize that the machine we serve is a tomb, and we are the funerary priests. But then the bell stops, the vox hum returns, and we go back to our ledgers with a renewed, frantic energy. The fear of the end is what drives the machine to move faster. We control the billions by making them run toward their own destruction, convinced that if they move fast enough, they can outrun the shadows. I recall the account of the final tithe from a system on the edge of the goal stars. The people there knew the Tyrannid hive fleets were coming. They knew there was no hope of rescue. Instead of fleeing, they spent their final days producing a surplus of iron, ore, which they loaded into automated transports and launched into the void, hoping it would reach the Imperium before they were consumed. They died as they lived as entries in a ledger. This is the victory of our system. We have made the process more important than the life. The war arrived at a forge world 3 years later. The paperwork was processed, the tithe was recorded as over-fulfilled, and the system was marked as consumed. No one mourned, no one cried out. The machine had been fed, and the machine was satisfied. The physical decay of my own body is now complete. My lungs are scarred by the ozone. My eyes are replaced by lenses of cold glass, and my heart is kept beating by a rhythmic electrical pulse from a chest-mounted regulator. I am more a part of the ship than a man. I look at the billions of souls below me, and I feel only the weight of their data. They are the fuel. I am the spark. The Emperor is the engine. We are a closed system of suffering, a perfect circle of extraction and devotion. We control the billions because we have made the alternative, the chaotic, uncaring void of the warp, seem like a far greater horror. We have given them a cage, but it is a cage with a god inside it. And for the human soul, that is enough. As I apply the final seal to the segmentum overview for the Millennium's end, I feel a sense of profound, icy peace. The ink is dry. The ledger is closed. The billions are accounted for. Their fear has been harvested, their faith has been codified, and their paperwork has been filed in the archives of eternity. The Imperium survives not because it is right, but because it is too heavy to fall. We are the masters of the ledger, and the ledger says that we must endure. The machine turns, the quill scratches, and the darkness is held at bay for 1 more hour. This is the secret of our control. We have convinced the galaxy that the only thing worse than the Imperium is the silence that follows it.